Thank you, everyone, for sticking around. And we're back live now with Mehdi Taileb. I'm so sorry for mispronouncing your name, who is a long-term activist for both WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, who has been, working for 8 years in this effort. So, Mehdi, would you walk us through how you became inspired to fight for Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, but also, what form that activism did take over the last 8 years?
Okay, well, thank you, first of all, Elizabeth, for your work and everybody else's work to prepare and run this vigil. I'm an activist. I'm just a citizen, actually, and I was a little bit pissed by what I saw happening to Julian Assange in 2010, and I decided to do something about it. I will a little bit repeat what I was saying in the last video. I'm sorry for the people who heard it already, but I'll go quickly over it again. But around September 2010, I had heard about WikiLeaks. Okay, so this organization, which had a funny name, I thought, which was releasing like secret material and things like that were hidden. They had been revealing things about the Iraq war and the Afghan war, and I found that great, but nothing surprised me really in what they were publishing, because I grew up. I'm originally from, and I grew up in Algeria, which is a former French colony, and the French did more or less the same that the Americans are doing now all over the world, you know. So nothing surprising me there. When I saw that there was these rape accusations and then an international arrest warrant against Julian Assange, Interpol red notice, it's like for top level criminals. So I thought, yeah. So if they want this guy so bad, it means he's super important. So I started digging more into, who is Assange, what is WikiLeaks, what are they doing really? I guess I came to understand more and more the importance of WikiLeaks as an organization, and Assange as its the founder, you could say the engineer behind WikiLeaks. And when I say engineer, I'm not talking just about the technical aspect of things. And also the leader of it. That's why as I saw the attacks really increasing at an incredible speed, and almost all governments around the world, especially led by the U.S. government, U.S. empire, of course, and all the vassal states, and pretty much everybody else who was more or less under the pressure of the empire. They all wanted Assange's head, and the media were all singing the same song as politicians, of course, because they are all owned by the same billionaires who are pals with the politicians. And it's all the same clique. And like it was said earlier, I think today in the vigil, they're part of a club that we are not part of, and they tend to do things that help and promote and protect each other. So all these powerful people were singing the same song, and I was really pissed. So I decided ultimately to quickly create this small nonprofit, like a grassroots nonprofit, which is called Liberty Info. That people might think that is like a journalistic outfit, but it's not. It's just a grassroots nonprofit organization. And to be honest, when I co-founded it with somebody else, we didn't have the idea of like publishing so many interviews and like articles and covering so many subjects. Like I told you earlier, we had to at some point do what journalists should have been doing all along. That is inform people on very important issues. Basically, that's how I came to dedicate a significant amount of my time and energy to defending WikiLeaks and Julian. And honestly, it's one of the best, if not the best thing that happens to me. It happened to me in my life. I'm very happy, even if it's not always easy, you know, because obviously you make some sacrifices, but I don't see them as sacrifices. I'd rather do what I'm doing now than be a slave of capitalism, like unfortunately most people are today. You know, they have they're always looking for material perks, but actually they live in a horrible world. And it was also mentioned earlier today. But for example, for U.S. taxpayers, for each dollar of taxes they pay, 50 cents goes to the Pentagon. Okay, so this is massive. So the Pentagon is bankrolled basically by U.S. citizens, by U.S. taxpayers.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So, and people are not informed. If they were more informed, and that's exactly what Julian has been saying for as long as I've been listening to him. If people were more informed, these things wouldn't happen at the scale that is happening today.
Absolutely,
So
I completely agree.
I don't know if you would like me to clarify any point.
No, I'd like to emphasize the point that you made about the fact that what Julian Assange has said is that the more informed we are, the greater our civilization can be. I think he used an analogy, and I if anyone remembers this from a particular interview, please throw the link into the Zoom chat and the in the YouTube chat, etc. But I think that in one interview he said he made this analogy where he compared the information that a civilization has access to the rungs of a ladder, and it is the information are the rungs of that ladder that we climb up, and that without that we are unable to evolve. And so I thought that is what you brought up. There's a parallel to what you were just saying.
Yeah, you could measure the maturity of a civilization by the level, by its level of information about what is really going on. And ultimately, that's why empires collapse. They collapse under the weight of their own corruption. It's because everyone is disconnected from reality. I mean, the people, and at the same time, the elites live in such level of corruption and wealth. You know what I mean by wealth, materialistic things, right? And they have such lowly lives, and it all just crashes suddenly at some point, and we might not be that far from that point for the U.S. empire. I think it might be the next big financial collapse. We'll see,
definitely. And what you were discussing just now, where you talk about the 50 cents of the dollar going of the tax dollar a U.S. taxpayer pays goes to the Pentagon. Well, it reminded me of this article that just came out recently in The Hill, where it said that just in the House easily passes $717 billion with a B, annual defense policy bill. So that's annually. That's absolutely unimaginable. The amount of
defense. And they call it defense, of course.
Exactly. Well, but basically what this tells us, though, is that the amount of money funding that, and then the amount of information that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have been able to bring us about the corruption involved with political power players, not just in the US, of course, around the world, but is just a drop in the bucket compared to what type of the information still has not been brought to our attention. And it really highlights the importance of the work that WikiLeaks does. So do you have any thoughts, though, on how you think that we should, can move forward as a movement? Do you have any advice to people that are watching and listening on how because you've taken it upon yourself to become an activist for a very long time. Do you have any sort of advice on how viewers who have not yet become activists, how they can do that, what they should do?
Well, I would say, we should, first of all, do not fool yourselves, okay? We are up against the most powerful empire in history. I mean, if people get this through their head, it's already a big starting point, because the people we're up against are very, 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 very powerful, as you have seen it when you wanted. Julian Assange to intervene during the emergency vigil, right? And this is nothing compared to what they can do. Look at what they did to Assange, to Julian, and he's still a very, very, very smart guy. I mean, if he were a chess player, he would have had like 3 or 4 steps, if not 10 steps. He would have been 10 steps ahead of them. That's why they didn't really silence him like they wished to. Yeah, I think people should really understand this, and knowing this, they should, and knowing also that as activists we have very, very little resources, right? We still need to keep a job to pay our bills and have a roof over our heads and put food on the table. Yeah, we have very little time, very little energy. And you need a little bit of courage, of course, because anything and everything can happen to you, because you don't know where it will lead you, where your activism will lead you tomorrow. Knowing that, I would say, yeah, take the time to organize, work together, think strategically. I think what's missing the most in the activist community, but also in other communities, but it's more important in the activist community, is to think strategically, to see the big picture. Because sometimes people, and well, I used to be a little bit like that, okay? So we tend to say, okay, let's do something. Let's do something. Yeah, okay, it's a good start, but let's do something effective. That's better. And to do something effective, we need to understand how the world works, how we can, you know, what are the weaknesses of the enemy, okay? I see the enemy as the US empire primarily, okay? What are the weaknesses of the enemy? For example, it's exactly what Julian did. The enemy hates transparency. That's why they want his head on the plate. So the more light we bring to the US empire, the more we will annoy it, and the more we will repel it. And I think the more we will push it back and tell it to back off, to leave Julian alone, you know. And one of the actions we could do that I've been promoting, some people have had this brilliant idea, and I've been promoting it and encouraging them, is to protest at US embassies worldwide. Some people have started doing that, and people some people have been doing that in Australia yesterday. There wasn't a lot of them, okay, but I think it's a start. Some people have been protesting in front of the White House today. That's brilliant. There wasn't a lot of them apparently, but it's a good start, and honestly, lots of respect for all these people. And yeah, so I think this is an action, especially if we can do it in a coordinated manner, because the media will not be able to ignore it. If CNN ignores it, MSNBC ignores it, and other channels, you will still have RT, you will still have Sputnik, you will still have Telesur, you will still have other media that are still significant, especially RT. RT is really significant now for anyone who wants to get some real information about what's going on in the world. And they are doing really very, very, very good job, especially if you watch shows like Chris Hedges' show or Max Kaiser's show or Afshin Akansi's show, or you know, they have really high quality shows. So yeah, it's important to understand your enemy, its weaknesses, its strengths. You understand your weaknesses, your strengths, and you decide on where to put your resources to hurt it the most. But the advice will be a bit long that I'm saying. I can't hear you, Elizabeth. Maybe you are muted. Right?
Yes, I've muted myself. Yeah, before we continue, could you maybe tilt your webcam down just slightly? Because we have a banner. We have a banner that was covering the bottom of your face. So not a problem at all. No, that's perfect.
Is better?
That's Perfect.
Okay.
So yeah, no, I think that you bring up a really great point, and it's sad that so many great, good journalists, and we were discussing before the break that, you know, the word journalist has become kind of like a black mark in itself these days with the amount of propaganda that most establishment journalists spew. But really good, truly good journalists like Chris Hedges and others have been forced to only be able to kind of exist on, you know, RT and other outlets like that. And that is very, very sad. It's incredibly sad. But I just wanted to add that comment when you were pointing out some of the great journalists that have had to resort to that.
Yeah, Chris Hedges was fired from the New York Times, right? Because he was covering the Iraq War.
Exactly.
Basically. So everything is in there, you know, we want to understand that.
Absolutely. So, what are some of the ways that you have been censored through when it comes to the efforts that you've made through your nonprofit? You know, you've talked about the fact that you were kind of unwillingly forced to become sort of a pseudo journalist in the sense of publishing articles and interviews against propaganda and to combat propaganda. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, honestly, we haven't known like a blatant form of how to say of censorship, simply because there still was many. For example, we went through the GI files, the global intelligence files, when WikiLeaks called for any like journalists or activists or to like help them go through this archive of Stratfor emails leak. Actually, we went through that and we published some things, but it wasn't like highly critical, and there was so many of people around the world doing that. Like it was difficult to censor us, like specifically. What else? Other sensitive stuff. When we've been running a campaign for Rudolf Elmer. Rudolf Elmer is a prominent whistleblower on tax on banking secrets, Swiss banking secrets. He's Swiss himself. Actually, WikiLeaks actually became prominent when they published the documents he gave in 2008, and they went through. They were sued by this big bank. It's called Julius Baer, I think they lost the fight because the bank wanted to censor WikiLeaks' servers in the US. And I think they succeeded at the lower court, but then at the appeal, WikiLeaks won, and servers went up again, weren't censored anymore. So this was a prominent case, and in late 2010, 2011, when I saw that, well, WikiLeaks. They have been like helping Rudolf Elmer, and like promoting his fight and so on. And he was still fighting. He's been fighting the Swiss system since 2005, and he's still fighting them, you know. And it has cost him a lot. I can't go through it, but we still have the support of look into that. You will see the whole history of how we supported him. And at some point, actually, I thought since WikiLeaks was so busy defending itself, and it was the case, I thought this guy would need probably some help from some activists or from somebody in his fight against this giant, which is the Swiss government and the Swiss establishment, not just the government, the justice system, these big banks, which are very powerful. They have tentacles all over the world. They have hundreds of billions, if not trillions, of money that they move around for mostly criminals, because it's covered by banking secrecy. How cute! He's just a guy, okay, and he was up against all these people. So I thought he might need some help. because WikiLeaks is really busy. So I contacted him, and yeah, we ended up running a campaign for him. And yeah, we even did some funny things, like during one of his court trials, we coordinated with him to release some documents, some like sensitive documents about the case, like revealing how hypocritical and corrupt the Swiss system was. So this was one of the actions we did, and it was funny because apparently it had an effect on the court judges, according to Rudolf Henner. I wasn't there really to judge, to say, but yeah. So these are actions we did, but we didn't really undergo any like active or noticeable censorship. But I've been always very careful, like I said, always think strategically, always have steps ahead of your enemy. If you do that, I think you'll be okay most of the time. So yeah,
that's great. That's great advice.
Yeah. Honestly, yeah. If you don't do that as an activist, especially in these very sensitive cases of like government secrecy and like the world, yeah, it can cost you a lot. So yeah, be smart about it.
So what do you think, what do you make of some of the developments that we've seen since our last vigil? Because I know that you've been with us prior in our last Unity 4J live stream, but obviously there have been a lot of changes since then, especially with the rumors that Julian would be imminently expelled from the embassy, but we didn't see that happen. So what are your what's your insight as somebody who's been watching this for such a long time on this political kind of back and forth?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to get some records straight about Ecuador, because honestly, as someone who has been again supporting Julian and WikiLeaks for a long time, and knowing the details of how he got the asylum and so on, I don't like it when I hear people, including supporters of WikiLeaks, who have maybe joined later or don't have the details, or criticize Ecuador. I think it's really unfair, because what has happened is that this new president, who has been elected last year, his name is Lenin Moreno. He was the vice president of Rafael Correa, who is, for me, the perfect president, best president he could ever have, because he's been fighting for Ecuador's sovereignty. Him and his colleagues, when he was president and when they were in the government, and they were really defending Ecuador's interests. So this guy was the vice president, Lenin Moreno, and he was all for the citizens' revolution and the program of Rafael Correa and so on. And he was, he seemed part of the the ideology and the beliefs that Ecuador's interests do not lie in the selling off of its economy to private interests that are backed or sponsored or run by the US government or US gigantic corporations. But as soon as he was elected, so he was a candidate for the last election, and Rafael Correa decided to not run. He's been the president of he had been the president of Ecuador for 10 years, Rafael Correa, right? And he decided to not run again. So Lenin Moreno, who was like his natural successor, got elected. And as soon as he got elected, he made a 180-degree turn on everything he was elected on. The program, the Citizens' Revolution program, anything and everything, the values, the beliefs, everything, all of it. So he betrayed not only his party, but also all the electors, all the Ecuadorians, the majority of them, who had voted for him on the base of this program, on the base of continuing the citizens' revolution, because it's been working great. It's been working great. It pulled so many people out of poverty. The public services improved a lot. Many things improved a lot. While the situation was very, very bad before Rafael Correa became president. So
Absolutely.
this guy betrayed absolutely everybody who brought him to power, basically, right? So knowing that, honestly, when I hear people say, "Oh, Ecuador is not fair," "Oh, let's boycott Ecuador," honestly, I think this is not the smart thing to do. It's not Ecuador; it's Lenin Moreno. We have to
Absolutely.
be very specific. Ecuadorians are
Definitely.
extraordinary people. You have all seen the pictures and videos of Ecuadorians protesting outside of the Ecuadorian Embassy, and it has been the case for a long while, supporting Julian. I mean, even before the betrayal of Lenin Moreno, they have always been supporting Julian. So the Ecuadorian people are extraordinary people. And I think it's really unfair to put them in the same bag as this guy, who is virtually alone. He's of course supported by the oligarchs, right? The Ecuadorian oligarchs and some other opportunistic politicians, but they are very few, and I don't think they will succeed. I will tell you a little later why. But it's unfair to put them together, to put the Ecuadorians together with this guy.
I know, and I agree, and I think that we've definitely done that. We have definitely pointed out the heroism and the outstanding solidarity that Ecuadorian citizens have shown by showing up at the embassy in large numbers to protest not only the treatment and Lenin Moreno's specific policy towards Assange, but also his appearance in the UK at an event for the disabled. They felt there was a lot of hypocrisy with that.
Exactly.
So I think that you're exactly right. And I think that and we've made this point before in this stream, that the Ecuadorians have every right to be extremely proud of their government of Rafael Correa and the history of solidarity with Assange, but also, as you say, standing up to the US empire. When the Australian government failed to do so, and they have much larger GDP, etc. So
yeah,
I think, yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, so basically this guy Moreno, he's a traitor. This is my opinion, it's just a personal opinion, but I think he's a CIA asset, because it's weird that he turned just like that so suddenly and blatantly, and he put everybody else, he pissed off everybody else, you know.
Well, there can be a lot of
party. You don't do that just like that, except if you're crazy.
Definitely, and I definitely validate and echo the fact that when Moreno was elected, Julian Assange's supporters breathed a sigh of relief, because he had run a part of his platform was to keep Assange in the embassy safe. And so,
Exactly.
I think that it's absolutely right that it's a betrayal. But I also think that, we have to assume that the amount of pressure that the Ecuadorian government and the leader of that government must be under, whether it's Correa or Moreno, must have been immense. And, there are a lot of different factors that could lead to him making the decisions that he has, whether it's, hypothetical blackmail, whether it's hypothetical payoffs, we just don't know. But there could be a lot of different things at play with this.
Well, honestly, I still stick with the CIA agent hypothesis, because if it was the pressure, it would have taken some time. You take pressure, and then you give up. But it wasn't the case. He betrayed them immediately, and just to tell you, in late 2017, his vice president, his name is Jorge. I'm sorry, I forgot his name.
It's okay.
Jorge. I'll just try to find it. Yeah. Jorge Glass. Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
There we go.
Jorge Glass. He was the vice president of Lenin. I think it was in November 2017, so just a few months after Lenin was elected. This guy, the vice president, he wrote a letter, public letter, saying that Lenin Moreno was betraying the country because he's an insider. As a vice president, he saw what was going on, right? So this betrayal happened very fast. And what happened to this guy, this whistleblower vice president? He was imprisoned immediately on fabricated charges. So he's still in prison right now, right? So this is Lenin Moreno for you. So honestly, I don't buy for a single second. It's just not just, it's an informal opinion because I've been looking into this. I've been researching things, and I think that it's just speculation. Okay, I think he's a U.S. asset, and he has been for a long time. He was just playing a comedy. That's basically what I think.
That's one idea. That's one possibility. I think that we have to keep all of the possibilities on the table, but ultimately, and I respect your opinion, but ultimately I just want to remind our audience that we can't know or endorse a single reason for his decision making. I also thought, I was shocked as well though, that Moreno seemed to do a 180, and I want to ask you about this. Was it actually immediate that he did this 180? Because just late last year in December, his government gave Julian Assange citizenship, and they also attempted to give him diplomatic status. And it was just after Christmas and New Year's, when news broke of that we then had this turnaround. At least that's the way that I perceived it. Is that the way that you saw it as well?
Well, the letter of Jorge Glass dated several weeks before that. So the betrayal was already, And don't forget that the citizenship is a long procedure. It has been started long before that.
True.
And, he probably couldn't stop it like at the last second. And he had
That's
probably
a good point.
And anyway, in any case, Julian Assange being an Ecuadorian citizen can be seen as an advantage for Assange or an inconvenience for Assange, because he is also subjected to Ecuadorian law as a citizen, which is not the case of a foreigner, which wasn't his case if he was just an asylee. So double-edged sword there. So not that simple, I would say.
Definitely. Yeah, nothing around Julian Assange and WikiLeaks is ever simple or one-dimensional, or, and it's definitely not usually the way that it is presented in establishment press. That's for sure.
Yeah, especially those guys.
And speaking of this from a perspective where you've been fighting propaganda for so long, are there any sort of issues, events, subjects, just anything that you feel that that we haven't really covered in the vigil, or that you feel hasn't been recognized by those who support WikiLeaks and Assange, like issues that you kind of want to highlight and bring to the audience's attention? Yeah.
Well, actually, there is. It's an excellent question. I've been taking some notes. I've been watching the vigil, of course, since yesterday. It's fantastic. So many fantastic people with different experiences. So, for example, I told you I'll tell you a word about the Australian government's support so far to Julian Assange. So, and I think most people don't know that. So I'll give you some interesting details, hopefully. In let me find the article again because I've been looking for it earlier. In 2012, I think it was in 2012, the then Prime Minister of Australia, her name was Julia Gillard.
Yes.
She actually tried to cancel Julian's passport. And to do that, she asked the AFP, the Australian Federal Police, to look for any crime that Julian may have committed that would have been a good excuse to cancel his passport. So this is the kind of support he got, right? This is I think it's shocking for many people, but you can look for the article. There's many articles on that on the internet. It's a bit old. It dates back 2012, but oh yeah. There's an article on WSWS.org. Right? It's called Australian Prime Minister forced to retract illegal charge against WikiLeaks founder. Yeah, I'll just read the first paragraph if you don't mind, Elizabeth. I think
that's totally fine. I just want to, before you do, I want to say that World Socialist website is a fantastic outlet that has done a lot of fantastic reporting on Julian Assange over a long period and recently. So just with that in mind, feel free to read from their article.
Absolutely. I've even met some of their guys at the vigil in June, and they stepped up their efforts since these threats of expelling Julian have been appearing a few months ago, and they've been doing a fantastic job. So I say 2012, right? The article says the concerted campaign by Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard and her government to support the Obama administration's threats against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who is an Australian citizen, was dealt a damaging blow last Friday. So the article dates from December 21st, 2010. The Australian Federal Police, the AFP, reported that it could find no Australian law that had been violated by the publication of secret US embassy cables on the WikiLeaks website. So this is what they found. And I think she was really pissed, this Julia Gillard. By the way, I've been looking at what she's doing now, and she has some prestigious positions, one of them being at one or two, I think think tanks or universities. So these people always get some form of gratefulness from the U.S. empire, be it as a position at the IMF or the World Bank or at a prestigious university. You can look that up on the Wikipedia page. I don't remember which university it is. But nice positions where you don't have to work too hard, but you have a big fat check at the end of the month. Exactly.
Yes. That is something that we've seen with a lot of figures that serve establishment interests, for sure. Whether you're a president of the United States or a prime minister of Australia.
Exactly. So that's Australian government support for Assange for you, right there. So I think many people will be shocked to see this, because this dates back almost 8 years, 7.5 years. And so many, Julian and WikiLeaks have been receiving so many of these attacks, and we don't know the half of it because many of them are secret attacks. Not
That's
all of
very
them
true.
Have made it.
I'm glad that you bring that up. Because I don't think that we've talked about that much during the vigil, and I think it's a really important point that there are attacks that we can talk about, but there are a lot that we've never heard of. Yeah. So if you want to expand on that, please do.
I've noted some points that you could mention. I've been listening to Jimmy Dore earlier. Fantastic.
Definitely.
Of Trump, I think, because I agree with Trump has no idea what he's doing, and he's like playing the stupid bossy boss. It's like one day I will do this, and tomorrow I'll do the exact opposite because I'm the boss, and I will show you that I'm the boss. And I think that's why he's doing so many contradictory almost things.
I think as well, Greg Barnes.
It's an asset,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think it's an asset. That's why personally I was for Trump. Not because I like Trump, because I hate Hillary more, and because I think Trump, he is actually he's not part of the system, and he is totally unpredictable. So he can do like crazy things. So betting on Trump was the bet by far with regard to helping Assange. And
well, actually,
in many ways, they hated Hillary so much because she's been so mean to them and to Assange.
Well,
I wouldn't say they support, because WikiLeaks is neutral. They don't support this or that guy. But
Yeah.
Hillary was so against Hillary.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're bringing up about the unpredictability of Trump is actually something, a similar point that Greg Barnes, one of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange's legal representatives in Australia, made earlier in terms of the sort of not unpredictability, but the way in which the current government, the Prime Minister of Australia, is not. And what would the phrase be? Is not as negative and hostile to Julian Assange's cause as Julia Gillard was. And so I think that it's interesting that we had somebody like in Julia Gillard who was so hostile, and now that's not the case. So I just want to remind viewers that didn't tune in for Greg Barnes's segment that if you do contact the Australian government, try to do it in a respectful way, because they are, I think, more open to dialogue about that now. So that's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, if we want to get back to the attacks on WikiLeaks that have not been publicized as much, I would love to hear your thoughts on those as somebody who's been watching this for a while.
Yeah, well, what kind of attacks there has been? Well, for example, the Swedish case, well, now it has collapsed, but it has been dragging on for so long, and they dragged it for so long on purpose, hoping that one day it would allow them to put their hands on Assange. And also because it was depriving him of his freedom of movement, right? Because he was either put in jail in isolation when he surrendered to the police after the Swedes issued the international arrest warrant. He was in the UK back then, and he had the authorization to leave Sweden from the prosecutor herself. But it was a trap, certainly, It was like, oh yeah, you can go, sure. But then, as soon as he goes, oh, he's running away. Catch this guy quickly. Okay, it's such an easy narrative. But Julian, as smart as he was very busy. This was at the heart of the publication of Cablegate. He had to go to London to promote Cablegate, to promote the release. So he had 1,000 things to manage. And yeah, I remember on his flight, I think it was on this flight specifically from Sweden to London. So that was in November 20. No, yeah, maybe in November, maybe a little bit earlier, 2010. Many of his laptops that were in the baggage disappeared. That's one thing. And clearly he was closely watched already back then. And they had already released, Collateral Murder and the Afghan War Diaries and Iraq War also. Yeah, they were he was in the visor of the U.S. empire and its puppet governments. So yeah, this is an attack, another attack I could think of. But yeah, what else?
Well, actually, I was wondering if you could. I think you mentioned the arrest warrant, like European arrest warrant, and to be very clear with our audience, that is not the same thing as a charge. It is not the same thing as as being charged with a crime. But there was and the arrest warrant has now been, I believe, dropped. The European arrest warrant aspect of the case. But do you know? Can you speak at any length about the corruption surrounding European arrest warrants in general? Because I know that they're a really controversial topic, and I'm not sure that our audience would have heard much about that in previous segments.
Exactly. Oh yeah, very very good question. Yeah, thank you. So one arrest warrant against Assange. There was two. There was the European arrest warrant, applicable within the European Union. Okay, so there was a directive dating back from the 80s maybe, or the 90s, that was supposed to allow European states of the European Union, to be more precise, to help extradite criminals that have been committing crimes in one European state, to get them extradited from any other state where they would have sought refuge. Okay, so that was the initial goal, you could say, but it was all hypocrisy. It was just to go after this, as they did with Julian. So there was this arrest warrant, that they issued against him, that is applicable in the European Union, and there was the Interpol arrest warrant, which is applicable in all countries which are signatory of or part of Interpol, which is, I think, a large part of the world's countries. So there were two warrants against Julian, and the was really the Interpol arrest warrant, because you could see back then Julian's picture and of Interpol in this section of the most sought after, the most wanted criminals by Interpol, who were had the privilege of being issued the red notice warrant, which is like the top level warrant for the worst criminals ever. So this one was really ugly because it has really damaged his name and good reputation. But yeah, this is the kind of attacks that Julian has been receiving. And just to go back to the abuse of the European arrest warrant by these countries, these governments, European governments. Actually, you had for example, people who had committed very small offenses. I don't know, like stealing a chicken. I think there was a guy who stole a chicken, or I don't know what, something really ridiculous. And they extradited him from another European country to that country where he allegedly stole like a small thing, you know. So
Exactly, yeah.
This is what they use it for. And at the same time, in London, you have very high-level criminals that are walking the streets and buying penthouses and living the life in the posh areas of London and other countries, and Paris and Brussels and I don't know, Amsterdam. Or so this is the kind of use and abuse, I call it, these governments do with the European arrest warrant.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically they used it to keep Julian basically under one form of detainment or another. So first jail and then virtual house arrest with the ankle, you know, the how do you call it?
It's a monitoring bracelet. Yeah.
Yeah,
to keep him under
bracelet.
house arrest. Yeah.
Exactly. So he had to wear that constantly. And just to add a little bit of harassment, they asked him to show up daily at the police station, the closest police station, which was still several miles away. I think maybe 10 or 20 miles away from his place of living. So so he had to every morning show up at this police station. Otherwise, they would have thrown him in jail again. You know, it would have been a violation of his house arrest conditions. And knowing that, at that time, Julian Assange was receiving lots of death threats, including, especially from top-level US politicians and media figures who was calling for his assassination and things like that. So he had to leave his place of living every morning at approximately the same time, because he had like a slot during which he had to show up at the police station. So if anyone wanted to harm him, it would have been very easy, you know. So he had to take lots of precautions and things. So this is how they tried to make his life miserable, and they made it miserable. But he's still, I mean, that's why I say he's been fighting for 8 years. Now it's our time to step up the efforts. You know? This guy has gone through anything and everything imaginable. He's been living with at least two chronic pains, one dental and one in his shoulder, for at least 2.5 years when the doctor said it. So yeah, that's why I say, yeah, Julian did everything he could do. Now we should really step up our efforts.
Definitely. And another aspect of the European arrest warrants that is so controversial for a lot of people, that I think is an important aspect of all of this history for our audience to hear about, is also the lack of prima facie evidence that is not needed in these European arrest warrants. So you don't need to prove that anything happened. So I don't know if you have any comments on that as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, very good point. Actually, you could say it's a violation of the sovereignty of each European state, because let's suppose you are the judicial system of, I don't know, France, okay? And you receive a European arrest warrant from Sweden, okay? And the person is in your territory, okay? And the person hasn't even violated one of your laws, okay? So legally speaking, you shouldn't arrest that person, okay? The crime didn't take place in your territory, and maybe it wasn't even punishable or covered by your own national laws. Once you receive this European arrest warrant, you have to surrender that person, basically. And this is a total violation of the sovereignty of each and every European state, or state or part of the European Union, to be more precise. And this is just one example of how this peaceful project that was the European Union, that was at some point the European Union, has been totally hijacked into a central form of control of all these states, which are which see more and more of their sovereignty given up to Brussels, to the headquarters of the European Union, and Europeans absolutely hate that. That's why they've been many have been voting for the far right, because the far right is like the typical political wing which demands like a return of more sovereignty and
so exactly.
So that's one reason why Europeans have been voting more. It's not the only reason, but it's one of them. Europeans have been voting more and more for far right parties. And yeah, it is a reality, and you could see it not just in the European arrest warrant, in so many things. People of the European Union, they could see so many daily burdens in their lives, and the reason is always like a European directive or European regulation or things like that.
Well, and the issue,
so,
but
yeah,
bringing it back to Assange, though, in the last sort of 5 minutes we have left in this stream, though, I think that the reason it's so interesting is because people in the press would, as we've been talking about the establishment media and the way they misrepresent the situation, they would talk about, oh, this arrest warrant against Assange, as if it meant a charge, for one thing, and if it meant there was any evidence of wrongdoing on the other thing. So what you've discussed shows that there is no evidence required for these arrest warrants to happen, and so it's completely corrupt.
That's why the case, the case was, there weren't, actually, Assange has never been charged with anything, right?
Exactly.
Even in his youth. And actually, the Swedish case was just a preliminary investigation to hear him about the accusations. Well, it wasn't even rape accusations, right? It was the police that wrote
an investigation.
One of the women didn't even sign her deposition. So yeah, this
complete farce.
Is total farce. And there was absolutely zero evidence behind it. It was just to lock him up and keep him on the run and not let him do his job. Punish him in the face of the world. Yeah, basically that's it. And yeah, earlier somebody mentioned the ACLU. I don't know if it was maybe it was the Midor or somebody else. he was saying that the ACLU was supporting Julian, but I don't think it's the case because I've been researching uh, um, today specifically this topic after I heard it in the vigil. I don't think the ACLU is supporting Julian, and it would
They
be
may not.
great if they support him because they generally get what they defend. And
Definitely.
on their website, they just they just mention like it's more like information than really a campaign, support. So personally, I would love. Actually, I'm wondering where is the ACLU? That's
Yeah,
my question.
exactly. I think that one thing is they may. I mean, I know some NGOs did speak up at the beginning. You know, when Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were the darling of the press in the early years, but
Yeah,
now
yeah,
they're lacking in support. So I
exactly.
think
Good point.
there's definitely a need for the public, as we've said, as Christine Assange has said many times, to call on those NGOs, write them letters, send them emails, and thank you, Mehdi, and I'm sorry I can't pronounce your name correctly,
No, it's
for
okay.
joining us and providing your insight as a long-term activist on some of the corruption surrounding this case, the absolutely appalling betrayal of Lenin Moreno to his, for the Ecuador, not only to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, but for the people of Ecuador. I think that's a really important point, and I appreciate that you spent the time with us today. It's been great speaking with
No
you.
problem. Well, thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks to everybody. And again, we need to step up our efforts, and I'll do anything I can on my side.